For 11 days in August 1992, the country stood in amazement as they watched nonstop coverage of federal government agencies, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the U.S. Marshals Service, and Federal Bureau of Investigation, with local law enforcement surround a small cabin and a standoff in the mountains of Idaho. When it was over, 3 people would be dead, and a government-fed media spin machine went into hyperdrive to try and make sense of what had happened at a place called Ruby Ridge. Who was Randy Weaver? Why was he targeted by the federal government and the Justice Department? What really happened at Ruby Ridge? Why was the federal government held liable for its actions?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, a veteran of the United States Army and Marine Corps, former history professor, book author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
Randy Weaver was one of 4 children born to Clarence and Wilma Weaver, a farming couple in Villisca, Iowa, on January 3, 1948. The family grew up as devout Christians and had some difficulty finding a denomination that matched their views, so they often moved around amongst evangelical, Presbyterian, and Baptist churches. After graduating from Jefferson High School in 1966, Weaver attended Iowa Central Community College for 2 years. In 1968, he dropped out to enlist in the United States Army during the height of the Vietnam War. He was stationed at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, where he attended the Demolitions Combat Engineer course conducted by the Special Forces, and he was discharged in 1971, having never served in Vietnam or seen combat. Randy Weaver and Vicki Jordison married in a ceremony at the First Congregationalist Church in Fort Dodge, Iowa, in November 1971. Weaver dropped out after 1 semester while attending the University of Northern Iowa after he landed a well-paying job at the nearby John Deere tractor factory. His wife Vicki worked first as a secretary and then as a homemaker. Vicki Weaver was a firm believer in the apocalypse factor and wanted the family to move away from Maine society, so they purchased a 20-acre property in remote Boundary County, Idaho for $5,000 in 1983 and built a cabin. They also believed that interracial marriages were an affront and held strong Christian identity beliefs, believing that Jews were impostors and white Protestants are the true descendants of Israel. Weaver also sought a life of solitude and became a self-proclaimed separatist from the federal government. Weaver testified about his racial beliefs before a U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee in 1995, saying, "I am not a hateful racist as most people understand it, but I believe in the separation of races. We wanted to be separate from the rest of the world, to live in a remote area, to give our children a good place to grow up." Weaver became friends with many members of the Aryan nations. Though he never joined the group, he was often a visitor at their compound in Hayden Lake, Idaho in the late 1980s. Aryan nations were already on the federal government's watch list, much like the Ku Klux Klan before it was destroyed in courts and by lawsuits. In 1988, Weaver decided to run for county sheriff using the slogan, "Get out of jail free," and he was a believer that Americans should not pay federal taxes. Weaver then had a property dispute with a neighbor who went to the Boundary County Sheriff and gave a statement, saying that Weaver had made verbal violent threats against President Ronald Reagan and the governor of Idaho, among others. This eventually led to the Secret Service interviewing Weaver, something he was very unhappy about and made him even more reclusive and angry at the government. In 1989, Weaver met undercover ATF agent Kenneth Fadley, who used the alias Gus Macassano at a meeting of the white supremacist group Aryan Nations. According to the government, after a friendship of 3 years, Weaver agreed to sell Fadley 2 sawed-off shotguns and was recorded on tape saying he could supply Fadley with 4 or 5 illegal shotguns a week. It was a trap. In December 1990, Weaver received felony weapons charges in connection with the 1989 transaction. During this period, the Weaver family relocated from a house they were renting into another cabin near Ruby Ridge, Idaho, in the Selkirk Mountains. In January 1991, 3 federal agents posed as stranded motorists near Weaver's home and, with the county sheriff, arrested him and brought him in for arraignment when he approached to offer assistance. Weaver's court date was set for February 19, 1991, and he was released on bond. The court date would later be rescheduled for February 20th, 1991 instead. However, a letter sent to Weaver by a probation officer mistakenly listed the date as March 20, 1991, which meant that Weaver never received the accurate court date. The feds then told Weaver that the gun charges would go away if he became an informant against the Aryan nations. Already distrusting of the government, Weaver refused the deal and informed the Aryan nations. Vicki Weaver was incensed and wrote to U.S. Attorney Maurice O. Ellsworth, addressing him as servant of the Queen of Babylon, and she wrote, "The stink of your lawless government has reached heaven, the abode of Yahweh, our Yahshua, and whether we live or whether we die, we will not bow to your evil commandments." She also wrote letters to law enforcement and any government agencies threatening violence if they trespassed on their property or take any action against the family. She was particularly concerned about the authority figures who might come and try to take her children. Weaver had made it clear that he had a 300-yard radius kill zone around his property, and anyone within sight ignoring the no trespassing signs around his home without his permission would be fired upon. While he never actually attacked anyone like this, he was very open about it and apparently serious. Not long afterward, on August 21, 1992, deputies of the United States Marshals Service arrived to arrest Weaver under a bench warrant for failure to appear on the firearms charge, thus beginning the 11-day standoff. A key point was that Weaver was never asked to surrender. He stayed inside the cabin with his family and friend Kevin Harris. Due to the suspicion that there could be persons held hostage inside the cabin, Federal Bureau of Investigation hostage rescue team was brought in. At the time of the Ruby Ridge siege, the Weavers had 4 children: Sarah, 16, Samuel, 14, Rachel, 10, and Elisheba, 10 months old. Vicki homeschooled the children. The situation grew even more tense as the national, then worldwide media became aware of the situation, and the Attorney General was under pressure to conclude the situation quickly. While doing a reconnaissance of the property, 6 of the marshals encountered Harris and young Sam Weaver in the woods near the cabin. A shootout then took place, and as to who fired first became a great controversy. The marshals shot, and Art Roderick killed the Weaver's dog Striker, then shot again, and there was confusion on who shot young Sam Weaver in the back as he ran away, killing him. During the firefight, Harris returned fire and shot Deputy U.S. Marshal William Francis Deegan in the chest, killing him. Then, on August 22, 1992, FBI sniper observers with the hostage rescue team arrived at Ruby Ridge. They were issued with their special rules of engagement, allowing them to shoot any armed adult male exiting the cabin. That day, FBI sniper Lon Horiuchi was concealed 200 yards from the cabin. Horiuchi fired when he believed Weaver and Harris were preparing to shoot at an FBI helicopter. The first shot hit Randy Weaver in the arm. Horiuchi fired a second shot meant for Harris as the men ran back into the cabin. The bullet struck 43-year-old Vicki Weaver in the face while she held her infant daughter behind the front door of the cabin and also injured Harris. Vicki Weaver died soon after, but her body remained in the cabin for 11 days. Horiuchi later claimed that he never knew she was there, but a sketch he doodled on hotel stationery the day after the shooting appeared to show that he was aware there was another person near the door. The next day, the HRT, unaware that they had killed Vicki Weaver the previous day, asked via megaphone on the third morning what she, meaning Vicki, and the kids had for breakfast in a way that came up as completely ghoulish to the Weaver family, who thought the HRT knew what they had done. The FBI and Marshals brought in Green Beret war hero Bo Gritz as a negotiator. His efforts convinced Weaver to allow Harris to receive medical attention, and he was subsequently arrested on August 30th. Gritz also convinced Randy Weaver and his 3 daughters to surrender also, which they did the next day. Weaver was charged with 10 major crimes, including murder for the death of the Deputy U.S. Marshal Deegan, conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to violate federal firearms laws, assault, etc. A total of 10 counts. Famed cowboy attorney Jerry Spence was Weaver's defense attorney, and he successfully argued that Weaver's actions were justifiable as self-defense. Spence did not call any witnesses for the defense, rather focusing on attacking the credibility of FBI agents and forensic technicians. The judge in the case later dismissed 2 counts after hearing prosecution witness testimony, which was conflicting on the events, as well as the fact that it came to light that Weaver had been approached by ATF agent Kenneth Fadley, who asked Weaver to supply the shotguns. That was entrapment, and the charges associated with that event the judge had set aside. Critics said that the very strict rules of engagement were altered during the Ruby Ridge siege, relaxed to the point to force FBI snipers to shoot unarmed adults. Larry Potts, demoted from the Bureau's number 2 position, and 4 other FBI officials were suspended pending a criminal investigation into whether they covered up evidence that the deadly force rules were changed during the siege. Weaver was found guilty of the 1 count failure to appear, for which he was fined $10,000 and sentenced to 18 months in prison, but he was credited with time served, having awaited trial for 14 months in jail plus an additional 3 months, and he was then released. His friend, Kevin Harris, was acquitted of all criminal charges. The legal fallout from public pressure was like an avalanche, mainly because it was an election year. An inquiry by the Justice Department criticized the FBI for failing to gather sufficient intelligence and for not ordering the residents of the cabin to surrender before engaging them in a firefight. It also concluded that Horiuchi's second shot was unconstitutional because Harris and Weaver were running for cover and could not be considered imminent threats, and both men were unarmed at the time. The inquiry further alleged that Horiuchi unnecessarily endangered others by firing at the door of the cabin, but the U.S. Attorney General decided that there would be no criminal charges against Horiuchi. However, local prosecutors in Boundary County, Idaho, charged Horiuchi with involuntary manslaughter. The case was moved to a federal district court, which dismissed the charges against Horiuchi on the grounds that he was immune from prosecution because he was acting in his official capacity. An appeals court affirmed the district court's ruling, but a second en banc or fuller complement of judges panel reversed that decision and required that Horiuchi stand trial. Before a third, larger en banc panel could be convened to consider that decision, the state of Idaho announced that it was dropping charges, and all 3 earlier rulings were vacated. These events also led to some demotions and suspensions of various people in the FBI, including HRT Commander Richard Rogers, who was also in command at Waco, but no charges were filed against anyone in the government except Lon Horiuchi for manslaughter, and those charges were eventually dropped after several years of legal wrangling back and forth. The event at Ruby Ridge became a global news story, and a clarion call to millions who believed that the federal government was exercising too much power without enough constitutional oversight, especially where the Second Amendment was concerned. Weaver was interviewed by New York Times reporter Ken Fusen in 1995, where he expressed his regret about not appearing in court for his 1991 gun charge, saying, "I'm not totally without fault in this." In August 1995, the U.S. government, in order to avoid a highly publicized trial on the civil lawsuit filed by the Weavers, settled out of court and awarding the 3 surviving daughters $1 million each and Randy Weaver $100,000 over the deaths of Sammy and Vicki Weaver. His family eventually received a total of $3.1 million in compensation for the killing of his wife and son by federal agents. In 1998, Weaver published his own book, titled The Federal Siege at Ruby Ridge, in our own words. where he toured gun shows and sold autographed books. In 1999, he married legal secretary Linda Gross in Jefferson, Iowa. Apparently, the event at Ruby Ridge had altered Weaver's outlook on many things. On June 18, 2007, Weaver participated in a press conference with tax protesters Edward and Elaine Brown on the front porch of their home in Plainfield, New Hampshire. He told the assembled group, quote, "I ain't afraid of dying no more. I'm curious about the afterlife. And I'm an atheist." The story became a major part of the anti-government political landscape and popular entertainment. A CBS miniseries about the Ruby Ridge incident titled Ruby Ridge, An American Tragedy aired on May 19 and 21, 1996. It was based on the book Every Knee Shall Bow by journalist Jess Walter. It starred Laura Dern as Vicki, Kirsten Dunst as Sarah, and Randy Quaid as Randy Weaver, and Bill Gunton as Bo Greitz. Later that year, the television series was adapted into a full length TV movie, The Siege at Ruby Ridge. The documentary Ruby Ridge was released by Reality Productions Group for the Learning Channel television in 2000. The documentary includes interviews with Randy and Rachel Weaver, FBI Site Commander Eugene Glenn, hostage rescue team negotiator Fred Lansley, civilian negotiators Bo Greitz, and Jackie Brown. Randy Weaver died on May 11, 2022, aged 74, after a month-long illness.
Thank you for watching Forgotten History. Please click like, subscribe, and share. Send us comments and show ideas, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Until next time.